The air inside the subterranean cellar always carried the distinct aroma of damp earth and aged French oak. I am a master viticulturist. I inherited a highly awarded boutique vineyard nestled in the remote coastal hills. I spent my days analyzing soil acidity and carefully nurturing vines that my great-grandfather planted 80 years ago. I walked down the stone steps on a quiet Tuesday morning to check the humidity sensors in the primary aging room. I reached into my pocket for my brass key. I stopped. The heavy, customized iron padlock securing the reserve gate was gone. It had been replaced by a generic, shiny steel lock fresh out of commercial packaging. The realization settled over me like a heavy layer of frost. I did not gasp. I just stared at the new lock, cataloging the sheer audacity of the intrusion. I walked back up to my office, logged into the encrypted local server, and pulled the footage from the discreet security camera hidden near the cellar ventilation shaft. The video loaded in high definition. At 3 a.m. the previous night, 2 men had descended the stone steps, carrying an array of industrial siphoning equipment and empty plastic vats. The men were my husband, Nathaniel, and his father, Richard. Richard owned a sprawling commercial winery 50 miles inland. He produced enormous quantities of cheap, unpalatable wine that relied entirely on aggressive marketing and heavily discounted supermarket contracts. His business was currently imploding. He was drowning in debt, losing distributors, and facing imminent foreclosure. He desperately needed a miracle to save his arrogant, carefully curated public image. Nathaniel was a man desperate for paternal approval. He possessed no career of his own, preferring to live comfortably off the profits of my boutique harvests while constantly complaining about my long hours in the fields. I watched the screen as they drilled out my lock. They spent 3 hours pumping the contents of 6 specific oak barrels into their plastic vats. They did not steal random inventory. They targeted my Opus Reserve. It was a proprietary, unreleased Pinot Noir that had been aging perfectly for 5 years. It was an incredibly complex, masterful vintage that I was preparing to debut at a private auction. The estimated value of those 6 barrels was astronomical. Richard intended to bottle my masterpiece, slap his own gaudy commercial label on the glass, and present it at the upcoming regional Sommelier Invitational. It was the most exclusive tasting event of the year, packed with elite critics and international distributors. He planned to pass my labor off as his own brilliant new reserve, hoping to secure a bailout contract that would save his failing enterprise. They assumed I was too distracted by the chaotic harvest season to notice a few missing barrels in a cellar containing hundreds. I kept my mouth shut. I needed leverage, not an apology. If I confronted Nathaniel, he would deny it, gaslight me about the lock, and Richard would hide the stolen vats before I could bring the local authorities onto his property. I needed a structural, unrecoverable execution. The commercial wine industry is regulated by the Federal Alcohol and Tobacco Tax and Trade Bureau. The TTB does not treat mislabeled or stolen alcohol as a simple misdemeanor. They treat it as severe federal tax evasion and counterfeit trafficking. Furthermore, true viticulture is an exact science. I did not just grow grapes. Every single barrel in my reserve room was stamped with an invisible, UV-reactive batch code. More importantly, I maintained a certified chemical profile of every vintage in an independent laboratory database. My Opus Reserve contained a highly specific trace of volcanic soil minerals entirely absent from Richard's cheap inland dirt. I compiled the security footage, the certified laboratory profiles, and my federal ownership documents. I submitted a priority whistleblower report directly to the regional director of the TTB Fraud Division. I detailed an ongoing high-volume counterfeit operation. I explained that an unlicensed, stolen vintage was scheduled to be illegally distributed and marketed across county lines at the upcoming invitational. Federal agents do not send polite warning letters for tax evasion. The TTB compliance officer contacted me within the hour. He was highly interested in the very active batch codes. We coordinated a very specific deployment strategy. For the next 4 days, I played the exhausted winemaker flawlessly. I came home covered in dirt. I complained about the weather. Nathaniel bought me a cheap bottle of lotion, acting like a supportive, attentive spouse while secretly holding the knife in my back. He told me he was going to a networking event with his father on Saturday to help support the family business. Saturday evening arrived. The Sommelier Invitational was held in a breathtaking, glass-walled botanical conservatory downtown. I did not stay home. I wore a tailored charcoal blazer and attended the event under my professional credentials. I blended into the sea of wealthy investors, food critics, and elite distributors. The room was buzzing with affluent conversation and the clinking of crystal glasses. Richard had secured a premium booth in the center of the conservatory. The setup was obnoxiously lavish. He displayed dozens of bottles featuring a brand new gold-embossed label titled Copper Creek Grand Masterpiece. Nathaniel stood next to him, pouring generous samples for a growing crowd of highly influential critics. I stood near a towering fern arrangement, sipping sparkling water, watching Richard bask in stolen glory. "This is simply extraordinary," a prominent magazine critic praised, holding the glass up to the light. "The structure, the subtle volcanic notes. Richard, you have completely reinvented your entire portfolio. This is a 98-point vintage." Richard chuckled deeply, adjusting his expensive silk tie. "It took me years to perfect the fermentation process. It requires immense patience and a true understanding of the earth. I personally supervised every single step of this creation." He lied effortlessly to the most powerful people in the industry, taking credit for my sweat, my heritage, and my land. At exactly 8 o'clock, the elegant atmosphere of the conservatory shifted. 4 individuals wearing dark, unassuming windbreakers entered through the main doors. They were accompanied by the event director, who looked incredibly pale and anxious. The agents bypassed the registration tables. They walked purposefully through the crowded room, heading straight for the Copper Creek booth. The ambient noise dialed down as people noticed the official law enforcement badges clipped to their belts. The critics took a step back, sensing a significant disruption. "Richard Montgomery?" the lead TTB agent asked. His voice projected clearly, carrying an undeniable weight of federal authority. Richard offered his practiced, charismatic smile. "Yes, that is me. Can I help you, gentlemen? Perhaps a tasting?" The agent did not smile back. "We are executing a federal compliance audit based on actionable intelligence of counterfeit trafficking and tax evasion. Step away from the inventory." Richard's confident posture crumbled like dry cork. I gripped the edge of the tasting table. "Excuse me? This is a fully licensed operation. Everything here is thoroughly documented. You are interrupting a vital commercial presentation." The second agent pulled a specialized ultraviolet flashlight from his tactical vest. He picked up one of the open bottles of the Grand Masterpiece. He turned on the UV beam and shined it directly over the glass near the base. A bright, neon green alphanumeric code illuminated perfectly under the light. "This specific batch code is registered to a completely different, independent coastal vineyard," the lead agent announced, turning the bottle so that critics could see the glowing text. "Furthermore, the laboratory analysis of this liquid proves it originates from a soil composition impossible to replicate in your county. You are currently pouring stolen, untaxed agricultural property." The investors and critics stared in absolute horror. The prominent magazine critic who had just praised the wine placed his glass on a nearby table as if it were contaminated. The realization spread through the crowd like wildfire. Richard Montgomery was not a reinvented genius. He was a common thief passing off a stolen masterpiece as his own. Nathaniel started breathing erratically. He backed away from the booth, his eyes wide with rising terror. "Dad, what is going on?" he stammered loudly. "Tell them you bought it legally." He threw his own father to the wolves to save his own skin, entirely unaware of the security footage I had already submitted. You do not possess the transfer manifest or the federal tax stamps required to distribute this vintage, the agent continued, ignoring Nathaniel's panic. Your commercial brewing license is suspended effectively immediately. We are seizing all property at this booth, and a secondary team is currently locking down your inland facility. Richard looked entirely paralyzed. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The absolute ruin of his legacy, his finances, and his freedom crashed over him in full view of the entire industry. His reputation was eradicated. No distributor would ever answer his phone calls again. Nathaniel frantically scanned the crowd, looking for an exit. His gaze landed on me standing near the ferns. He stopped moving. The brutal truth finally pierced through his delusion. He saw the cold, unblinking calculation in my eyes. He realized I did not just discover the theft. I had engineered a scenario where his father would confidently tie the noose around his own neck on the biggest stage possible. Nathaniel opened his mouth, raising a trembling hand toward me, desperate to plead for mercy. I didn't need to hear his pathetic excuses. I handed my tasting glass to a passing waiter, turned my back on the wreckage of their public humiliation, and walked toward the exit, leaving them to drown in the bitter dregs of their own arrogance.